the Middle-aged Bodcast. Getting older, but having some laughs.
Welcome to the Middle-aged Bodcast with me, Raging Rich.
And me, T.A. Shalana.
And T.A. It is our second guest of Season 4 joining us today. We are joined by Griffin from the Reboot Deboot podcast. Hello, Griffin.
Hello there. How are you?
Really good, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And that's Reboot Deboot, is it, Rich? Not Reboot Deboot, as apparently I was pronouncing it wrong when we were talking to Griffin before the episode, and I got suitably chastised for my pronunciation.
It's funny you said Reboot Deboot because I've started saying that to co-host Alex occasionally. Yeah, it's just funny to hear someone else say it because I've been saying it as a joke recently, like off camera to him. I think I've even said it once or twice in like an intro.
Not just me, Rich.
Well, that probably sets us off quite well. Griffin, if you would like to just please start by introducing yourself to our listeners.
So for those who don't know or unaware, my name's Griffin. How you doing? Hey. I am a podcaster, a self-published author, and most recently a Twitch streamer. I've been doing a podcast for... technically I've been doing this version of this podcast for 5 years, but overall I guess I've been podcasting and vlogging for almost a decade, possibly longer. And the main podcast is Reboot Deboot. And my friend and I, co-host Alex, I'm co-host Griffin, we will watch movies and their remakes and reboots, and then we will compare the movies side by side and kind of break them down and see if this is needed, if this is necessary, or the main question that pops up, why would you remake this? We've been going on for 5 years. We have 138 episodes, and each episode at least covers 2 movies. So really, we're in 270-something movies watched or whatever.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We do have a little bit of a question for you at the end about Reboot Deboot, actually, because there's a few films coming out this year that I'm sure you're aware of.
Sure.
That are reboots and remakes and various other things. But we'll get to that a little bit later on.
Yeah. And then so you've obviously been doing that for 5 years, which is fantastic. Makes us feel pretty amateur. I suggest Rich with our 8-9 months. Another veteran podcaster on the show. Obviously, you mentioned some of your creative things that you're involved in, podcasting, self-published author, which we can always come to later. But I know one of the things that you wanted to talk about today is about how you sort of navigate dealing with sort of anger and frustration.
So it's not, I've never had an anger problem what you would envision. I actually didn't realize that I understood anger until I read the John Lydon biography when he was describing himself, and he had this passage in the book that said, anger is an energy, but I've always been incredibly angry and just venting it through music. And I started thinking about it, and the one emotion or one byproduct I've always been able to understand or resonate with is frustration, anger, rage. And not that I'm a rageaholic and not that I believe in that, but if there's one motivator I have, or if there's one thing that pushes my art or my creativity most, it's just something has to be stabbing me in the back with a stick. I am working best when I'm frustrated or when I'm angry. And I started to realize that, anger is an energy. Anger is a byproduct. It is a human emotion, but it is also triggered by something, either a feeling of inadequacy or a feeling of left behind or not enough self-growth or self-improvement, or even a childlike anger of not getting your way in a moment, or having too many things go wrong. You wake up in the morning, you stub your toe, you spill your coffee, and you just get mad. But I've always been able to resonate with that. And I started thinking in my just personal life when I'd flash back, I'm I've never really been a hothead, but I've always just had internal anger. I've always just been annoyed that something that seems so clear can't transcend. And usually it comes with social issues. It's just rule 1, don't be a dick. Don't be, if you want to be treated like a way, treat someone like that. And it was in those moments that I've realized, man, I'm a really angry person. But I've never expressed it. I've never been violent, but I've also always been channeling it into writing or music or something, using it as a creative funnel.
I think that's interesting. I'd be keen to hear more about how you feel in terms of the impact then of doing sort of, you say, writing, music, podcasting. How does that help you then? Do you think there's like a sense of an achievement in what you're doing, or there's a focus in what you're doing that is then taking away from the time that you might have becoming angry or frustrated because you're channeling that into something productive?
There are different kinds of anger and frustration, and everyone has these, there are only two things in life, and there's only two kinds of people. Everyone has their own little colloquial saying of that. But I believe there are only two real things in life: things you can control and things you can't control. And you shouldn't worry about either of them, because if you can control a situation or an event, then control it, manipulate it, alter it to your advantage. And if you can't control it, it's out of your hands anyway. So nothing you do will matter. So there's no point in being mad. If you're dealing with feelings of frustration or rage or fury, obviously there are different levels to why these things come up. But for me, I've always used art as a weapon. I've always been like, if I'm mad about something, I grew up reading Bukowski and Kerouac and Ginsberg, and these guys were, like the first generation of beat poets, and Hunter S. Thompson and Hemingway. And I've realized that I don't really have idols, I don't really look up to people, but most of the artists that I enjoy, they've always been pissed at something, Bob Dylan or Tom Waits, and it's always been done with either humor or art to offset the anger. George Carlin and Richard Pryor and Bill Hicks. So for me, when I decided to start writing, which was the first creative endeavor I really took after, and I became a self-published author, my first book was me trying to figure out if I could do this. And I was angry at that time because I had a lot of personal stuff I was just going through, just being a young 20-something, right? I was just kind of confused, and I was going to go with life, and realistically, it was my fifth existential crisis that I had had. But my second book, I decided this is going to be my weapon. Like, if the pen is mightier than the sword, if words and phrases and books can outlast any kind of metal or steel, then I need to make a book that bites. So all of my stuff was very pointed. It was very written with a point. Honestly, looking back at it now, that book it's absolutely so just me complaining. Like young man yells at cloud. And then the older I got, I fine-tuned my weapons into forms of, I can be intelligent, I can be articulate, but I'm still mad. And when I channel that into something, I know that I'm creating to a standard I can hold and agree, and I'm creating it from a place of earnestness. Even if it's like anger, it's still a true emotion that I feel. So I'm getting to utilize that and then express myself in a way that might resonate with other people.
That's really interesting. I'm just wondering, in terms of I'm going to pronounce this correctly, because the man to my right will tell me off if I don't. Reboot Deboot. How did you say you've been doing that for 5 years now, which sort of timeline-wise takes us back to kind of around the sort of start of, I guess, the COVID pandemic.
Yep.
Just interested to hear how that podcast got going, and how you've sort of maintained that for so long, really.
So to talk about Reboot Deboot, we actually have to rewind the clock a lot to 2012, when I was at home and my friend Ricky showed up, and he's like, hey, we should do a podcast, and we should call it Buzz Critics, and we will drink 40s and talk about movies because critics create a buzz and will be buzzed. And I'm like, why not? So it was low production. We did it in my bedroom. We're sat like you guys are, but we're also both drinking. And we're just talking about movies. So then that went on for a couple of episodes, and then my friend Ricky left. And then a few years later, my friend Jorge and I started hanging out more. And I'm like, hey, we should do Buzz Critics again. So then Jorge and we had a better studio. It was his house. We're still drinking, and we're talking about movies. And then 2020 hits, and I'm talking to my friend Alex, who I've known since high school. And I was trying to get him to do a podcast because I hadn't done one in a while. So I was like, we should do Buzz Critics again. And Alex, he was like, maybe just get drunk and talk about movies. And I was like, well, then let's focus the idea. What if we talk about like remakes? Like there's a lot of remakes, and we can call it Reboot. And Alex was like, Reboot, or like Deboot. And then we just hit the ground running.
That's great how you got the name just from sort of...
Just from that. And the podcast show has also been rebooted twice by me. So this is the third iteration of this, it's just... And it just seems so natural at that point. And then once we focus the idea, because if you listen to the early episodes, we're not sure the format, we're not exactly sure about how it's going to work. And then as the ball gets rolling and episodes go on more and more and more, the show gets much tighter. But yeah, this has kind of been the podcast albatross around my neck that I've just ended up carrying, which I love. But it's funny how that's what I fell into from what it started as to where it is now.
Fantastic. And you mentioned obviously how anger and frustration can kind of be used as a direction creatively to help push you on creatively. And one of the things I found actually with doing the Middle-aged Bodcast, I'm sure TA will agree that I have had times where I've been like, what's going on? I need to do this and do like 100 things at once and trying to do the editing and kind of getting that done. How do you kind of direct that into a way of kind of making sure that you're getting episodes on time and getting all the kind of the editing, the publishing and all that kind of process of getting the podcast out there?
So this is going to come as a shock to you guys because it comes as a shock to everyone, I've realized. We don't edit the podcast.
Oh, wow.
Alex and I will hop on a Discord call. We will not have talked about the movies at all between, and then we just have a straightforward conversation that day and it's Friday or every other Friday, depending on when Alex goes into his actual job. And we just take the live, like the audio as is. He records it, he sends it to me, and then I upload it to Spotify, which also then distributes the RSS feeds individually. And if Spotify goes down, we just have the RSS feeds anyway, so I can distribute it manually like that. But yeah, there's no editing, there's no real rush for production. We record Friday mornings at like 10 a.m. CST, and by 1 p.m. the episode is out online for people to listen to.
That's incredible. So the episode's actually out that day of you recording it.
Yep.
We're doing this all wrong, Rich. We've spent 2 hours today just talking about scheduling for the next week.
It's just for us, it works. We've had, and every other guest is like, but you don't edit? Like, no, we don't edit. There's really no dead air. There's really not a lot of ums and ahs. There is a few times when Alex and I will find ourselves in a patch of silence, but we quickly cover that up because, well, we have another thought about this. And it helps that we both have known each other for so long and that we're able to have a similar flow, but we also don't always agree with each other. So there'll be a lot of point and counterpoint, and there'll be a lot of decent dialogue around a movie and a remake. And, you know, Alex has found some that he loves and some that I just can't stand. I know, and we've even gotten into a few arguments on the podcast about this, where in the early seasons it happens a little more frequently. And if you listen to those episodes, like, do these guys even like each other? Like, are they even friends? This sounds like they're about to, you know... but it's good. It's fun. It's strange to think, because I've talked to Alex about it. I'm like, should we edit? Like, should we do a thing? And then we'll go back and listen to it. It's like, there's not much to edit here, really. There's maybe cut out this 2 seconds of silence or maybe cut out 5 seconds of dead air. But this is a packaged product ready to go. We even did it live on Twitch last week when we were covering Clash of the Titans. I was like, you just want to do a live show? And then I pulled up my stream, had Alex on there. We did the whole thing. We cut out the first half hour where we just do cold open talk. That was for the stream. And then we released the rest as a podcast. It was ready to go.
That's something we need to try and look into, isn't it? That's something we should try.
I'm looking at the smiling face because I know Rich doing his editing and whatnot has sometimes sort of gets like, this is taking too long of me doing this, and it's his frustrations. And I think it's interesting. You've actually I can't remember how many episodes this is now we've recorded, Rich, but you've finally basically brought your mask down. That Raging Rich is rational, reasonable Rich in the podcast, but you've admitted that offline, you know, that's where you rage around the production values, which is interesting. Well, it's kind of tied exactly into what Griffin was sort of saying. Really.
That was kind of. So Raging Rich is actually a bit of a joke because there's a YouTuber called Angry Ginge.
Yes.
And I just thought, you know what can I have as my sort of pseudonym? And so I was like, well, I'll keep, because Richard is my real name. So I was like, I'll keep Rich. But I was like, what can I have? Oh, well, sometimes I'm like, oh, this has gone wrong. Oh, blooming heck, what's going on? I could be Raging Rich. And then I've been told I'm the calmest man ever on the podcast.
When I first went to go listen to your guys' pod, I saw the names and I was like, Raging Rich. And I was like, first off, great, like perfect DJ name. Just perfect DJ name. And then I'm like, frick, not much rage. More reasonable and, like, paced. Not much rage there.
It's ironic, actually, that there's been a couple of episodes in season 3 where I've ended up being the one getting really annoyed about certain things and become more of the raging element of it. But yes, it's just the way it's worked out. In terms of
TA? Raging Rich and Tetchy TA? Was that just...
I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, there's a whole story, obviously, about how we finally came to have the author pen name. Much like yourself as a self-published author, but I don't know. I'm just, in terms of then, all these episodes, obviously you've now recorded in its current guise, for want of a better phrase. What are your sort of favourite things you've covered?
310 to Yuma. That was great. That was a great original movie and a fantastic remake. The Invisible Man, and then obviously like The Thing, like Thing from Another World, and then John Carpenter's like Thing from Another World was bad, but John Carpenter's like, it's great. We did The Fly. The Ocean's 11, the Thomas Crown Affair, the original with Steve McQueen. We did Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, and then the remake of the Magnificent Seven. And it was half the time it's an excuse just to watch these like movies that made cinema. So when Alex and I came across Seven Samurai, we're like, it's time. We need to sit down and we need to watch Akira Kurosawa. And there've just been there have been a lot of really good treasures. That was just, I understand why this is cinema. We covered Dial M for Murder, the Body Snatchers. We did all 4 of those, and then there have been some, some not great ones. Rollerball, the original Ocean's 11, Scum. You guys remember Scum?
Yeah.
So there's a Canadian remake of that called Dog Pound, and it is not good. It is not good at all. It's like, if you wanted to make Scum, but you took all the moral implications out of it and you took away the character of Archer and just replaced him with a sex pest, that's what Dogtown is. It's really hollow. There have been a few movies where it's just like, you saw this, you wanted to make this, but you're missing the key elements of what made this movie cool, or like good or impactful. And they've just been real letdowns. And then there have been some, like Scorsese's The Departed is actually a remake of Infernal Affairs, which is a highly regarded Korean film trilogy that's just like critically acclaimed all over the place. Scorsese bought the rights and then he remade it as The Departed. And just little things like that will come out. It's like, man, this is good. This is really, viable. This is very entertaining. Or, yeah, sometimes it's a drag. Like, we just watched Bold Boy, and that was rough. Because, it's such a heavy, intense, dark, original piece. And then to watch the remake, it's like, well, again, you wanted to make this really impactful movie, but you took out everything that made it impactful and intense, and you just kept the uncomfortable subtext. Or, like, the uncomfortable content. And then and it's a shame, because Josh Brolin and Elizabeth Olsen are in it, and it's not a great movie. And it just taints their acting capability, really.
How do you choose what you're going to cover?
The equivalent of closing our eyes and throwing a dart. In the early days it was easy because it started out with Halloween, and then we went to Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Hellboy, and now we're getting to well, what do you want to cover? And the upcoming episode we're actually doing is Mr. Deeds Goes to Town from the 30s, and then Adam Sandler's Mr. Deeds. So, and there's a few that I really wanted to cover that I was waiting for. I was waiting for Roadhouse, and I was waiting for The Crow. And The Crow broke my heart. That was such a letdown. Because that was one of the movies I grew up with. That's one of my core films. And it's also Brandon Lee's second and last movie. And then watching what they did to it, I'm like, this is a garbage fire. This is just so up and down bad. But yeah, at this point now, if we can't think of one, we'll just go online, and the Wikipedia has an entire list of remade movies. And then one, if we can find it. And then 2, if it seems interesting. Some of them we just do for the historical value, or for the indie value, or for the art. And then others, they'll be that's well, let's just do a fun one. We need kind of a fun one. And the last episode we did was Rampage, the 2018 movie based off the video game. And that was just because we needed a palate cleanser for Bold Boy. So
I've actually seen Rampage with The Rock.
yeah, it's such an easy movie to make, and they fumbled it so hard.
It does seem like that with certain films, doesn't it? That it's kind of like, I suppose, Super Mario Brothers all the years ago, the Bob Hoskins version and things like that. They're films that they just kind of think, oh, anyone will go and watch anything and just make it with very little effort to it. You mentioned Street Fighter there a bit earlier, and I remember the Raul Julia and Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. Not very good, nothing like the source material.
I'm gonna have to disagree.
There's charm to it. I will agree. There's charm.
I love Raul Julia so much in that movie. As Bison, he eats the scenery.
Oh god, yeah.
And I just want a Bison supercut. The rest of the movie is bad, but he is so good. He's so committed to that role. And it was his last role too.
It was, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think I read about that he kind of he said he did it for his kids, I think.
Did it for his kids because his kids were fans of the game. And then it was, the last movie he did before he passed away. But that Bison performance is so good. It's just so over the top. It's great. You can't help but love it. It's just so good.
Well, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned sort of some of these films, have you ever done like a comparing multiple remakes at once? So obviously,
we did that with Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, and the Magnificent Seven.
Oh, you did that as a whole thing in one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just thinking, this summer, obviously, there are 2 films coming out that are remakes upon remakes. So we have Superman, and we also have the Fantastic Four. Personally, for me, I love the Superman movies. I love every version of Superman. Obviously, Christopher Reeve is my favorite version of Superman, the one that I grew up with. But I thought even Brandon Routh's version, which is kind of a reboot but not a reboot, that was not the worst Superman film that I've seen. I thought he did a really good job in it. Man of Steel, I thought was fantastic. But I'm just thinking, like Superman, you've got the Christopher Reeve version, you've got the just going off the films, obviously, the Brandon Routh version. Then we've got Man of Steel with Henry Cavill, and then now this new Superman is coming out. And then, of course, Fantastic Four had the original films, and then the reboot that they did do, Fan Four Stick, which, in my opinion, the less said, the better about it. How would you kind of cover those sort of things? I know you've done some already. I know you've done, I think you've done the Superman.
We've done Superman, we've done Batman, we've done Spider-Man, we did Doctor Strange, because there was a TV movie made of Doctor Strange in the 70s. Yeah, there are some interesting, we've thought about that. Like, do we go back and, because we did Batman, but we always did we did like the earliest, most famous iteration, or the first one, and we'll do the most current and or like an acclaimed one. So with Batman, before we did, like, it was before the Batman Matt Reeves came out, so we just did like Batman a retrospective over the years. I don't know if we will be doing the new Superman, because we already said so much in the Superman episode. It would just be focusing on that singular one, and we'd have to compare, like, oh, how is this comic book Superman, or how is this movie Superman different in tiny ways, because we've already covered like the scale of Superman when we did the Superman stuff, and that was the first Christopher Reeve one, and then the Henry Cavill one, and we touched some milestones in between. There's another one though that's coming out that I'm actually very interested in, and that's Killer Clowns from Outer Space is being remade with Ryan Gosling as executive producer.
Oh wow!
Oh yeah, that I love that movie so much. So first off, surprised they're remaking it. Don't know why. As a rule, if there's like an indie cult classic horror movie, don't remake it, because you're not going to capture the camp and charm and low budget, high effort that those movies had. Specifically, like Rob Zombie did when he tried to do the Munsters, and it just sank slowly like the Titanic. But I really like Ryan Gosling, and Killer Clowns is such a loved movie across the board. I've never met anyone who hates it, because everyone understands exactly what it is. So seeing a remake of that, I'm cautiously optimistic for, is the word. But sadly, we don't have much time, because Alex works Monday through Thursday. Fridays is his off day, so that's why we record on Fridays. But every now and then we'll have a longer stretch of time where, like this week, we have to take a break because Alex is working on Friday. So we're doing something a little longer. But yeah, in the past we covered Hannibal and then Red Dragon. So we did the entire whole of the TV show and then the Red Dragon movie because that's where the last arc ended, and that's kind of the only thing from the book that was transposed. And if there's time, I'd love to do some anime ones. I'd love to do One Piece, Bleach, Dragon Ball. But I know that those are all thousands of episodes long. They've been going for like 30 years. And then there's one movie or like one other series. And it's like, we just don't have the time. Like, there's no way to fill in the time. Or if we had the time, we wouldn't be doing an episode for 6 months.
It's always a challenge, isn't it? Is the scheduling of things and fitting everything in, especially in something like that where you've essentially got to take the time to go and watch something. Not that the man to my right has just set me that challenge actually, just recently to go and rewatch something like for like an anniversary.
Okay.
Basically, and so watch and actually look at something through a modern lens and things like that. So it's not often
we can actually say it because this episode's going to go out. So we've just done an episode. Well, when this goes out, we'll have done it on Back to the Future.
Oh yeah, okay.
So it's obviously the 40th anniversary, and so the way we kind of have approached it is, rather than, because there's going to be so many podcasts trying to do the 40th anniversary review of it and covering things, so sort of said we should look at it from kind of our podcast perspective. So it's kind of going about it, like George McFly, for example, shows a lot of neurodiverse tendencies in 1955, sort of delving into that a little bit, looking into things like Biff, for example. Sort of lots of displays of toxic masculinity. It's pretty much implied he tries to sexually assault Lorraine towards the end, and yet they then employ him to work for them. When you go back to 1985, and kind of how would that, you'd never get something like that put into the film nowadays. It just wouldn't be part of that plot line. So kind of looking into that kind of thing. And TA has seen Back to the Future before, but not as much as myself. So it was just trying to find a different approach to it, really.
Sure. The 80s movies and the 80s mindset of what was acceptable, and this even led up into the 90s too. There are some sensibilities that if you watch now, you go, man, that was rough. That was just really rough. Or like, how did that get passed? Or how are audiences then reacting? And you realize, oh, it's because it's society. Society was able to laugh this off, or society had a softer view on this because it's locker room talk, or boys will be boys, and it's all these excuses to language. And especially since the 80s had that moment where they were really nostalgic for the 50s. And then if you look at Back to the Future, which is totally aping that concept of like, we're literally in the 80s, but now we're going to go back to the 50s. So you're watching a movie in the 80s that takes place back in the 50s, being watched by audience of the 80s who are already going through a fashion trend where the 50s was cool. And you're creating a very strange echo chamber of, well, the greater context is that, I mean, you know, there's probably some spousal abuse. There was probably a lot of not agency for the women. There's probably a lot of like innocent behavior that is nefarious at its core, but because it's the 80s, it's fine. If you look at like Porky's or Revenge of the Nerds, or I mean, so many sex crimes in Revenge of the Nerds, but people are like, oh, it's such a hearty, funny comedy, and it's like, not really. Like, it's funny because the movie tells you it is, but if you actually look at what they're doing, it's like it's pretty rough.
I mean, having not seen the film for a long time, you know, just sort of having rewatched a couple of nights ago, the thing that really jumped out at me with Back to the Future for a family film as well was where it was almost saying that, and the way they'd done it, and my wife picked up on it as well, was where you had the town in the 50s and how it was all sort of clean, tidy, everything was sort of, everyone was very smartly, and then the 80s suddenly is like X-rated films, sort of drunk sleeping on the bench, and you know, and then those little plays in around sort of how the television and rock and roll were introduced in society, and a big thing in certainly in America as well was that was a corruption of youth, and then it's almost the way they've done that as a, oh look, we brought these things in and look what it did. Right. So it's almost, that's the kind of I think reflection as well we were looking at it through. It's really interesting. I mean, obviously this the thing that jumped out as well is a huge amount of racism in the first film that said that there's just no way you could have those kind of things being said about black people, Irish people, and all that sort of stuff. Now it's incredible when you watch it and you think, yeah, this was just a family film in the 80s. And
Right.
when you haven't watched something since probably, I haven't watched it for a long time. It's those reflections that you would never have had. So, it was a really interesting thing to go and do. But not that we're trying to steal your crown in the movie world, of course.
It's where we've actually never covered Back, because Back to the Future has never been remade.
No.
So, and anytime like a movie gets re-released, that's not a remake nor a reboot. So there's a lot of movies that are like Jurassic Park, never covered it, never been remade. When the first one gets remade, then we'll be there. Until then, everyone else can have that.
Is there anything you'd like to see done that's not been?
So we actually had this conversation on the podcast a while ago, because after 5 years and 138 episodes, Alex and I turned to each other and we realized nothing is sacred. They're remaking Steve McQueen movies. They remade Ben-Hur. Indie movies get remade. Remakes have been happening since film, right? Like there are movies that came out in 1910 that we remade in the 20s, that were remade in the 30s and the 40s. So when people now say, movies are just being remade now. No, movies have always been remade and they will continue to be remade. We realize nothing is sacred. Everything is up to be remade. And it doesn't matter. Your childhood is just your childhood and is not special to anyone else. So that movie you love is up for, it's on the table. It's just a question of when, not if. But there are a few things that I think I would like to see with modern graphics or with modern talent, or movies that I think took larger swings. That because of the time, they were limited by either their storytelling or the way movies were made. So one of them that I think that we need to remake, there is a delightful little indie film called Jump Tomorrow that came out in 2001. And it is this Office-esque, Wes Anderson-esque little romantic comedy that no one else in the world has seen. But it's just a delightful, fun movie. And I was like, that needs to be remade, but keep the same sentiment, and it's great. For bigger action pieces, there were movies that came out that maybe weren't great, that we need to let's give it a second go. Let's get a different director. Maybe let's get some actors. I know that Equilibrium came out, and that's not a lot of people have seen Equilibrium. I think we could do a really good remake of Gattaca, especially now with Black Mirror coming out and everyone kind of being like desensitized to dark technology stuff. I think a remake of Gattaca would be fantastic. But again, you have to keep some of the themes in the spirit of the movie, because you could also release these and they could fall flat, and then it would tarnish whatever legacy the movie is built. I was going to say I'd love to see Taxi Driver remade, but then they made Joker. So I'm like, I'm Taxi Driver completed. Like don't get me wrong. It's not that I wanted Taxi Driver to be done better. It's that I think more people needed to see Taxi Driver, because how many under 35-year-olds have seen Taxi Driver? How many 20-year-olds have seen Taxi Driver? How many 18-year-olds have seen Taxi Driver? And they got it with Joker. Now, it may not be as impactful, and it may be a mess of mental illness that is misrepresented, but the spirit of the movie is the same. And it's enough for me to go, okay, I accepted it. And then when Joker 2 came out, I know a lot of people hated it. I thought it was great. I think that people who hated it absolutely missed the point of it. It's those are two movies that back to back, I'm like, that is the kind of like visceral, uncomfortable breakdown of a human. And same thing with like Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood. That is a great character study of the Daniel Plainview mindset and type, and the early settings of this American tycoon, but also just tyrant. And there are movies that need to be remembered, or their concepts and their ideas and their themes need to be remembered. So sometimes a remake is necessary.
A really interesting point, actually. Like you say, some films you kind of think, yeah, it'd be good to see them done through a modern lens, even just with the technology. And I'm just wondering, sort of, the opposite side of that previous question. So are there films that have been remade that you think never should have been, or ones that potentially should just be left alone, really, and never brought back because they're already such a great film and there's nothing you could do to really improve on them?
Scum, Rollerball, Magnificent Seven, King Kong remake was really unnecessary because you're not saying anything. The goal of a remake should always be this: what can I do differently? And so when most people make a remake, they go in with, oh, I'm just going to use a cash grab. This is just going to sell. And with superhero movies, it's easy to do that. But also, superhero movies aren't ever really character studies, they're action films. So they totally get a pass. And plus, every generation has their Superman or their Batman or their Spider-Man or their Captain America or their Hulk. You know, it was Lou Ferrigno for the longest time. And now it's Mark Ruffalo, and totally fine. And then Edward Norton in the middle for a little bit. You have to ask yourself, why are you making this movie and who for? What is this movie? Like when Eli Roth made Death Wish, right? When he remade Death Wish. Now, we covered Death Wish and we watched the original Charles Bronson and, bad guy, good man with a gun, pushed too far to his limits. You watch the movie and we were like, man, this is, he's not really so much as a vigilante as he is a spree killer. Because if you go back and you watch Death Wish, he's not finding people who are committing crimes. There's literally a scene in the movie where he walks into a gas station in a rough neighborhood and flashes his money around, creating a situation where he can be robbed. Then he puts these two dudes in a situation where they're going to rob him because he's a white dude on the wrong side of town, and then he kills them. It's like, that's not vigilantism. You picked the fight and you knew you had a gun. That's not no. And then the whole movie had this whole conversation. Like, it didn't have a conversation on gun violence. It was most people going, and God, Bruce Willis, you're killing all of these horrible criminals. And then one time they had cut to a DJ, and it was Sway. He's an American DJ over here. And he was like, is the spree killer a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. And then it just cuts back to the movie. It's like, that's not the conversation. That isn't the conversation about good guy with a gun or not. You're just glorifying vigilante spree killer. This is why would you remake this movie? Because you saw it when you were a kid and it was impactful and you thought it was cool. So now you want to bring that back. But you're also doing it at a time in America when spree shootings are at a high. So maybe this is just a tone-deaf move. Maybe you're not reading the room. And see, right now, I'm getting angry thinking about Eli Roth doing that. But this is how I channel my anger. I make podcasts about it. I make art about it. And I make, I don't get much to get heated about these things because it's like, Eli Roth, just don't do that. It's simple. You're a director. You're respected enough to where you could have made any movie, and you could have made Death Wish, and you could have had a really interesting conversation and a really interesting remake and point about gun violence in America and vigilantism and good guy with a gun versus bad guy with a gun and timing. You didn't do any of that. You chose to waste your artistic expression. You chose to waste money, time, and the movie tanked too. So it lost money. So in the grand all scheme of things, you remade a movie that had 5 sequels already. Only one was really like people were the original Death Wish. So the other 4 had already been dragging the series down. And then in 2018 or 2017, Eli Roth decides to make a remade version that's just a tone-deaf move. It's just what are we doing? Why?
What I like in that is that Griffin has just done an absolute perfect type of version of a Raging Rich about Death Wish there. It was a great rant about that, actually. I think it's interesting you mentioned, obviously, in terms of going back to the whole sort of anger and the creativity side of things. So what impact do you think creative endeavors, such as the writing and the podcasting have had on?
I started out, I guess I've always been a writer and I've always known that, but I was never aware of it. Back when MySpace used to be, I graduated in 2006, and when I graduated, I had 18 years old out of high school, and my MySpace was full of just poems and pieces, and they were all angsty teenage shit, 18-year-old who gained consciousness one day writing. And I realized going back, this has all just been a vent. This has all just been an avenue to channel some sort of either inner or exterior anger, whether I'm mad at myself for not doing more, for not realizing, for not having the motive or letting fear control me. And all of those drivers have pushed art in one way or another for me. And now I use it like a weapon, but I also realize that there are other people who probably feel like me. There are other people who don't know how to articulate or don't know how to explain, and they need to feel heard or seen. And if my writing, if some of my poems or my horror stories, or I even have a kid's book, if any of that can resonate with someone or their kids or their family members, then it is one less person who feels less alone. And if I can close that isolation, then I feel like a job well done. One of the main things that creates anger is feeling you are misrepresented, feeling you are misheard, feeling you are an island, basically. And the people who have tried to be islands have had very tragic ends. It's all about creating bridges towards people. You have to build bridges, connect with a human. And if you can make that connection, it will make them feel less alone, less isolated, and then you can start expanding their social circle. You can start expanding their communicative abilities, and you will start to take away some of that frustration. So if you can make someone feel less alone, if you can make someone feel a little more in control, if you can make someone feel validated or felt seen, or you can connect with them, you might be able to prevent an outward burst of anger. Anger turned outwards is violence. Anger turned inwards is self-violence. If you can turn anger sideways, you can create humor. You can create art. And I think that if you can get past that primate rage that everybody has, where you just get angry and you just want to like hit something, take a deep breath and realize if you can control it, do something about it. If you can't control it, don't worry about it. And if you want to go deeper than that, then find a way to channel it. Take up boxing, take up sparring, run, listen to music really loudly. I'm not saying blasting AC/DC at full volume helps, but it definitely doesn't hurt. There are so many ways to channel and vent. And I feel like most people, when they get to that point, they feel like they have no other options left. And if that is a very dangerous person you have created. When you strip away someone's validity, when you take away them being seen, when you reduce them to a number, or you make them feel inadequate, then you're dealing with a whole other kind of monster. And that's the terrifying thing, because there's those monsters who go on to make headlines in the worst possible way.
So it's quite profound. Rich, you got a response to that?
Well,
It's kind of blew me away.
it is very true. I think you're right. The thing about control and being able to control things in your life seems to have been that real sort of theme around anger and sort of directing it into a different avenue. Certainly, this podcast has helped, but finding other avenues and outlets as well. It's certainly something I could be looking at, and I know TA, obviously you've got the writing as well, and have sort of been very focused with the 100-day writing challenge and things like that I know have really helped you to gain some focus. You've mentioned there, Griffin, that you've written children's books and some other things. What sort of led you to doing these different kind of books? What was the sort of the inspiration behind that, or was it just sort of a natural progression as you were going along?
I guess it's my ego. 10 years ago, I sat down and I wanted to write. I was like, I just come off of a really bad job. And I had some stuff going on with my family, and I was stressed out. I was angry. I was confused. But I'm like, I'm not done. I'm gonna just write. I'm gonna be a writer. Hunter S. Thompson writes. Jack Kerouac writes. I'm just gonna write. So the first thing you do is you write what you know. So I stuck on some Tom Waits, and I got drunk, and I started writing. And Hemingway says, write drunk, edit sober. Not always the greatest advice to follow, but if you're like a 19, 20-year-old, like 21-year-old writer or whatever, perfect advice to follow. So my first book reads like a bad Hunter S. Thompson novel. I phrase it like him, I write like him, and it's horrible. And then my second book is a cleansing of that, because I released it and I was like, okay, well, I know that it's a bad Hunter S. Thompson novel, and if I know that, anyone else who's read Hunter S. Thompson or seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is going to peg this for what it is. And I don't want to be called a Hunter S. Thompson ripoff. So my second book, I have to find my own voice. So my second book was me finding, like, what do I write like? What do I say? How do I word things? How do I phrase things? What is my writing style? How do I write? And one of the things that I realized is I love wordplay. So I started playing with the idea of like fast and loose connections and wordplay and references to things and making it all circle back on each other. I love that stuff. So my third book is when I was like, okay, first book was just to prove that I could write a novel or like write a book. Second book was to find who I am as a writer. My third book is my actual book. Then I did a fourth book, and then I started thinking, okay, I've done the post-beat poetry. I've done 4 books of post-beat poetry. The last poetry book I did is actually called Paint a Picture, and it is a paint by poetry book. So I have a poem that is actually instructions to paint the picture the poem is describing. And then I was like, well, where can I go from there? What do I do? Well, I love horror. I love Stephen King. I love Anne Rice. I love H.P. Lovecraft. I want to write horror stories because every horror story I'm reading now and every horror movie I'm watching, it's kind of the same tired jump scare slasher. Where'd all the cool monsters go? Or where'd all the really like psychological stalkers go? Where'd all the real strange cosmic horror writers go? So then I was like, okay, rule one of writing. There's a lot of rule ones of writing. Rule one of writing. If there is something in the market that you want to read that you haven't, you create it yourself. So I started writing horror. And then I was like, well, where'd all the kids' books go? I mean, where'd the Very Hungry Caterpillar or Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss? And it seems like around about the mid-90s, there was a major, like, it was individual kids' books comes out. But where are all the classic fairy tales? Where were the generational, where the wild things are? And, you know, Are You My Mother? And If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, where are all these generational books now? So again, I saw a gap. I wasn't really looking at kids' books. I have no reason to, but I'm like, I have some ideas for kids' stories. So I wrote a kids' book. And I actually wanted to make it like a pure kids' book. I met an artist and I had her hand draw all of the painting, all of the pictures and stuff. And that's called Bedtime Stories and Fairy Tales. So then after that, I'm like, okay, well, now I'm going to write another horror book. So then I wrote a horror collection. And now I'm actually working on a space western radio play for YouTube that I'm going to produce. I have 2 books that I'm writing, and I wrote an entire book in the month of November on stream because my chat had made it a competition that I could not finish and start a book from scratch. So I wrote an entire book on stream, and I was only allowed to write when I was streaming.
He's putting me to shame here, Rich. I thought I was doing well with my 100-day writing challenge on my second book. I need to up my game.
No, you are doing well. It is so hard to write, and only writers know that. Everyone thinks writing is easy. No, it's not. It's not. It's a pain. Most of the time, writing is looking at a white rabbit in a snowstorm. That blinking line on Microsoft Word, and you're sitting there going, I could be listening to music. I could be eating. And then you type a word, and you go, I don't like the way that word, and I don't like it. And then you sit there for 2 more hours, and you go, well, I wrote today, and then you come back the next day. You know, that's a lot of what writing is. And every now and then you get bit, and you're like, oh, this is great. And then they did this, and then they did this, and I'm going to use this word because this word is better. And hot, humid, moist. Moist is a good word. And then you can, you know, burn through 90 pages, 80,000 words, and then you go, yeah, I'm done. And then you won't write for 6 months. It's not easy.
It's one of the reasons I ended up doing the writing challenge, to be honest, because your description there is probably not too far away from what happened with the first book, which took me a lot longer, you know, during COVID and whatnot. But yeah, the second one, I was like, oh, I really want to move along quicker, and that really helped me actually having that focus and discipline where you go, right, I'm going to do something every day, even if it's not a lot. You might only get half hour if you're lucky, you know, and try and that's just really, really helped me. And then obviously I'm now coming towards the stage of getting towards the first draft and the whole process, but then from there. But yeah, you're right. It's not straightforward, and neither is podcasting as well. Which one of the things that annoys Rich and I is when people tell us that this is easy and it's just talking. I hate it when people do that. It's just
it's the same thing with streaming. Oh, you just sit around and play video games all day. Yeah, video games for 4 hours while I'm trying to constantly keep talking. And I have to be relevant, and I have to be funny and charming, and I have to also be myself, because I don't want to create a lie. So yeah, I'm basically like a late night host. And if you think that's easy, talk to Conan O'Brien, talk to Johnny Carson, talk to any late night host. Letterman, Leno, John Peel. We'll see how easy it is. It's not easy to be charming and interesting and witty, and because you're trying to create a product. And the thing with podcasting and streaming is that because everyone has a podcast now. So you have to sell your personality. So you have to bring your perspective. And that is very hard to do to capture an audience because your perspective is such a 1-to-1 ratio that you have to be broad enough and open-minded enough and engaging enough, but have such a unique view that it's still you, but broad enough to where everyone can go, I can understand that.
I think we're sort of coming to the end of the episode, and obviously thank you very much for joining us today. It's been fascinating, actually. It blew me away with a couple of your reflections, I have to say.
So Griffin, is there anything you want to just give a shout out to, sort of where our listeners can find you on the internet, or obviously have you got a website for your books, or where can they find Reboot Deboot?
So you can find Reboot Deboot on Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, wherever podcasts live. Or you can just go to Twitter/X at Reboot Deboot Pod. And that's everything podcast related. You can find me on Twitch at the Renegade Jester /twitch.tv. And then all those, I have links to my books over on Amazon as well.
Thank you very much.
We have a little bit of a tradition on this show with guests, which is we almost Jerry Springer style reflection but not Jerry. We give it to the guest, which is to give your final reflections or anything that you'd like to say or add, or sort of any message you want to put out there.
John Lydon said, "Anger is an energy," and Shakespeare said, "This too shall pass." If there are things that are frustrating you, if there are things that are driving you, you're finding yourself getting anger, short-tempered, fury, rage, take a deep breath and realize that you either can control it and you can't. And if you can, then manipulate it, change it, alter it. And if you can't, then it's out of your power anyway. So there's really no point. Instead, turn that anger sideways. Find a reason to laugh, find a reason to create, find a reason to just vent it out in a safe and healthy way. You will feel better about it, and it'll also help you be able to focus that the next time you get angry. And you might surprise yourself with what you're able to accomplish. If you want to start working out, next time you get mad, pump some weight, maybe hit the mile. If you tell a joke, listen to some music, maybe pick up a music, like an instrument. There are ways to channel anger in healthy avenues, and I think that more people need to explore those avenues, and you would surprise yourself with what you can do.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Griffin, for joining us here today.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Two best mates here to take you to stand. Rachel, Rich, and TA got your health in the hands. Williams, laughs, and tales they tell. For beats and nights, the workouts, they're keeping it real. Oh, it's the middle-aged